Welcome back. I'm Austin. Westfall, a live look at New Orleans. New Orleans residents are trying to process Wednesday's truck attack on Bourbon Street that rocked the city, and now a memorial in honor of the victims grows this evening. Fox's Sarah Alegre has been at the site all day, and she joins me live near Bourbon Street. Sarah, what are people saying out there?
Yeah, hi there. Well, right now we have the FBI asking the public for any kind of help when it comes to detailing the moments that led up to that deadly attack that took the lives of 14 innocent people. And meanwhile, their family, their friends, even strangers just grappling right now with the what ifs.
My heart is so heavy right now. It's really heavy.
We love Terry Kennedy. That's one out of many messages plastered on the walls of a growing vigil along Bourbon Street. This comes just 2 days after Shamsuddin Jabbar drove his pickup truck into a crowd of people early Wednesday morning.
Terry was a sweet and kind person. He was very sweet and kind.
Eddie Williams visited the site of the attack in honor of his uncle, Terrence Kennedy, who was one of the 14 victims in the New Year's tragedy. He was a 63-year-old New Orleans native who called Bourbon Street his second home. Williams saw him there just the night before.
And the last thing I told him, I said, I'll see you later. I guess it's going to be later than I thought.
Alongside the many messages is a cross where people from near and far stop to pay their respects. All shaken by the attack the FBI is calling an act of terror.
This is somebody's child. This is somebody's mom. You know, these were people's cousins and grandparents.
Roberto Marquez is an artist who drove to the French Quarter from Texas.
Those families, it's good that they know that we care.
Marquez says he felt called to build these 14 crosses and paint a mural for a grieving community.
Not only the families, but also when people come, they pay their respects. We're united, we're here, and you are not alone.
And while the city finds their solace and strength and hope, they remain vigilant.
We just have to take it one day at a time, because like that senseless act like that right there that happened, who knows when something else like that will happen again.
And right now, sources do tell Fox News that both the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security are warning local law enforcement agencies across the country to be on the lookout for any copycat attacks. In New Orleans, Sarah Alegre, back to you.
It does look like we may have lost Sarah there possibly. So what we'll do is we'll continue on here. We've got a live look at New Orleans as we continue on with our coverage. You see the Superdome there. That will be the site of the Super Bowl come February. We do want to continue discussing this with the national security analyst, Hal Kempfer. Hal has been guiding us through much of this story as this investigation has progressed. Hal standing by right now. And Hal, we just watched Sarah's report together. You've spent time in areas after tragedy occurred. Can you describe the psychological scar that can be left on communities after events like this?
Well, Austin, it's actually a sort of a collective PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Seeing something like this, what it does, and if you get in, and I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but let's just say, PTSD is kind of part and parcel of what we deal with in the military all the time. It's there's survivor's guilt, those who came very close to ending up in a fatal situation, but barely survived, and then being right next to somebody who didn't make it. In some cases, their friend, their loved one, that they're standing right next to one moment and then they're gone. This just has a traumatic impact psychologically on an individual. And that goes well beyond the physical scars, if you will, well beyond the physical injuries, everything that takes place. And it takes a while for it to manifest itself. Sometimes you see it right away, and sometimes, people will go on for quite some time, and then they'll start, and they'll say they're fine, and they're not fine, and they need to deal with it. So part of it is for those who are down there, they probably need to talk to someone who has professional training in this and how to deal with this and how to process what's happened. They've just survived a dramatic, sudden, violent, life-threatening situation, and so they're trying to process that. So that has a huge impact. of what's going on there. And of course, the sense of vulnerability, I think, for everybody in Bourbon Street, but all the things are coming out about the problems with the basically Bourbon Street being unsecured to vehicular traffic, and that numerous warnings going back to a report in 2019 that for some reason didn't appear to get widely disseminated on a threat, basically a big threat assessment that was done for the city of New Orleans that apparently members of city council didn't even know about, that talked about some of these issues, some of these areas of vulnerability. And then, of course, last month there was a national warning that went out talking about, among other things, the threat of vehicular ramming attacks. And apparently that didn't get widely disseminated within the New Orleans area amongst top decision makers. And so there's a lot of questions that people have about security, which is if the leaders didn't know about this, if they had not planned for this, what else is there that they have not planned for? And that causes I would say a collective concern at the very least, and in some cases some fear amongst the population, and certainly fear for those who are planning on going to New Orleans for various types of events like the upcoming Super Bowl. Have they done everything?
Which will be taking place at the Caesars Superdome on your screen there. Let's move on to the investigation, Hal. ABC News reporting today that the suspect had traveled to Egypt for a month. This was in 2023. This is part of their ongoing investigation. Why might Egypt be significant?
Now we're getting into the radicalization cycle. This is the sort of thing that we've seen. If you go back with numerous cases, I can think of the San Bernardino Inland Regional Center case. There was travel to Saudi Arabia. This is where potentially, and we will find out more, but potentially they will, certainly make initial contact online. That's very normal. And I'm talking about domestic terrorists that may have an Al-Qaeda or ISIS orientation, if you will. They're looking for answers. They're trying to find things. Of course, part of it is that you find Jabber had a lot of serious traumatic issues in his life. His divorce causing essentially what sounds like financial ruin for him personally. And so all of this kind of culminating, he's looking for answers. He's looking for it in many cases in his religion. And in some cases, they start looking for it on the fringes of the religion. And that's where we start seeing this, many times when they go to the fringe, they start seeing the more extreme elements, and then they see the more violent extreme elements. And then a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times, they will actually travel overseas to a country where they potentially could meet someone who could act, or an individual or individuals could act like a guru that will essentially indoctrinate them. And they will indoctrinate them not only in their ideology, their manner of thinking, but in some case, they will actually indoctrinate them as in provide them training, how to make bomb making materials or how to make bombs, how to do a vehicle ramming attack, how to shoot weapons, tactical training. That's important too, because one of the things that they found is that there are chemicals in the actual IEDs, which are bomb-making chemicals, which are not associated with bombs that we've seen in the U.S. and Europe. They're associated with other parts of the world. Now, it's not quite clear what these chemicals are. That's being kept very close hold. But the fact that you're seeing something in bomb making that we've seen in other parts of the world but haven't seen here indicates that he had knowledge, or he had some sort of knowledge or training on how to make bombs that came from somewhere else, inferably the Middle East, Central Asia, someplace where ISIS and ISIS-K are very active. And so a trip to Egypt could be actually a critical piece of this, and trying to put together whether, what degree he is actually trained. The other thing too is we're getting into the definition of terrorism and international terrorism. Up to this point, they keep referring to him as a domestic terrorist. If it's shown that he was connected to international terrorists overseas, he traveled overseas, now you're talking international terrorism. Now you're talking conspiracy. One of the things with just that small thing, which is those unusual chemicals in the bombs, indicates that he had access to either individuals that were helping him potentially, or he had training. And now we're going to find out exactly what that is. And if it's more than one person, by definition, it's a conspiracy.
Help the audience understand why this is important. The suspect's been dead for 2 days now. He acted alone, so there's no more threat. What is there to learn from piecing his past together? Why is this investigatory work so important?
Well, there's no more threat from him, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's not a threat somewhere. And in piecing it together, we're trying to figure out, was he a classic lone wolf? Was he someone who just did this on his own? And the classic lone wolves, even classic, as we like to say with lone wolves, wolves aren't actually loners. Wolves tend to travel in packs. May not be a big pack, but it's a pack. And even if it's an online pack, there's a pack. There's people there they're talking to. As we often say, before they're acting out in the real world, they're venting like crazy in the virtual world. And what we're trying to figure out is, who was he talking to? What were those communications? Was he associated with other individuals? And then you start to, as they say in counterintelligence world, walk the cat back to figure out who he was talking to, when he was doing things, when he was learning things, when he may have come up with this conspiracy, when he may have been doing pre-attack surveillance, when he may have been doing, rehearsals, whatever it is that he did in terms of conducting this attack. They're putting together a piece of the puzzle. Now, if it turns out that he was, maybe, for example, this is purely hypothetical, that he was recruited online, all right, that he had wandered into areas where they were reaching out to him, and maybe someone, one of the things you're going to ask for is, did he pay for his own travel to go to Egypt? That's a big indicator right there. And in Egypt, did he somehow get pulled into a terrorist training cell or something like that they could have done that? Again, purely hypothetical. Then the next question would be, was he the only one? Were there others? And then they got to put together who those others might have been. And that indicates that there might be a broader conspiracy, which indicates a higher threat level. That gets into, what do we do for upcoming events? We got the Super Bowl that we already mentioned, but we also have the inauguration. There's other things that are coming up. This is what the FBI does. They work with not just the FBI, but they work with other government intelligence organizations that put this together to figure out what we need to do. Is there something more that we need to be prepared for? Right now, what they're saying, and this is absolutely correct, was, as far as we can tell, it was just him. It was simply a one individual that was doing the attack. But that's the attack. The question is, was he just one individual that did all the stuff in preparation for the attack? Was he just one individual that came up with this plan for attack, or were there others that were suggesting things and then putting together whether there was a network involved, and whether this attack may be a one-off, or is it something that is a broader series of things?
Right.
Could happen in New Orleans or happen anywhere else in the country.
We are looking at images right now of people walking around, talking, traversing Bourbon Street. It has reopened. Of course, the memorials, as we've been talking about, have been growing and growing in the area. Before we go, Hal, what big questions do you have about the attack at this point, 48 hours removed? You and I were talking offline, for example, about how easy it was for someone to barrel down Bourbon Street that night.
More and more is coming out about how vulnerable Bourbon Street was. Apparently, there are certain times a day, and keep in mind you have a lot of business establishments, so certain times a day there's vehicular traffic just loading and unloading stuff for the bars, the restaurants, the hotels, everything else. So you do have vehicular traffic on Bourbon Street. I haven't been there. I haven't been on Bourbon Street recently, but years back I was on Bourbon Street, and there were times a day you'd see vehicles moving up and down Bourbon Street. It wasn't blocked off all the time. The big thing is that you had this major event, New Year's. This is one of the centers, if you will, for celebratory activities for New Year's in the country. All right, this is not a minor. If you're looking at other cities, some cities aren't big, but Las Vegas is big. Obviously Times Square is big in New York, and New Orleans is big for New Year's celebrations, and that basically they had taken down the bollards to block vehicular traffic, which was the main thing, the main obstacle, if you will. And they hadn't put out other things. And now more stuff is coming out that they had actually obstacles that the city had bought that apparently they were just sitting in storage. And the police chief or the police superintendent herself basically expressed that she didn't know that these things were available. So they had essentially a plan to restrict traffic down the street by parking a police cruiser, but they didn't put any actual vehicular obstacles that would stop a vehicle from doing a ramming attack like this. And then as they're looking at it, they're also saying, okay, that's for Bourbon Street itself. If you've been down to Bourbon Street, you know there's a lot of side streets. I mean, it's a French Quarter. It's a huge area. So one of the things that's coming up is, what about all these other streets that go into Bourbon Street? Were they blocked off at all? How were they blocked off? Were they completely accessible? Could they have been a scene of a possible attack? This gets to culpability, if you will, at decision-making levels of how the security was done on Bourbon Street. Obviously, in New Orleans, they're not going to turn around and say, well, gee, we just really messed up. That's not going to happen. But the governor today has switched, and he's basically pointing fingers at New Orleans and saying, hey, look, they did not do what they were supposed to do. And there are a lot of very pointed questions at what was the security planning on that street. Were they really prepared? And of course, this is coming a month after, DHS had put out that report talking about the threat of vehicular ramming attacks. So it's huge. It's a big issue, and that's going to be playing out over the next weeks, months, maybe even years.
We appreciate your help with this story throughout the week, Hal. We'll be talking soon. Have a good weekend.
Okay, you too, Austin.